shit. That's what I'm talking about.
Wait! Okay, now, from the beginning.
Welcome to BS, Beyond Stereotypes, a podcast about lawyers using their authentic voices to change the world.
You know this, and maybe your listeners don't know this, but, you know, I don't have a family. I'm a single guy, a proud gay man, and I will probably never have a family. But this firm is my baby, and I love it.
Welcome to BS, Beyond Stereotypes. I'm your host, Merle Vaughn. Here to BS with me today is my friend, Bob Major, whose story I find fascinating and who will no doubt inspire all of you to embrace your authenticity. Hi, Bob. How you doing?
Hey, Merle. How are you? I'm doing great.
I'm good. I am so excited to have you on the podcast. I just want to say that let everybody know that you are celebrating the 40th year anniversary of Major Lindsey Africa, and it's just awesome. It's exciting, and I'm so happy to have you here.
It'll be 41 next month.
Oh, wow. That is amazing. I mean, you know, they say if you can make it through the first, what do they say, 7 years? No, that's a marriage. If you can make it through the first, 7 years of a business, then you'll probably be okay. But 41, wow, that's impressive. So let me just tell folks a little bit. I think your reputation precedes you, but let me just give folks a little bit of background information on you. Robert Bob Major graduated from Stanford University, I think, with a degree in political science, and then went on to the University of Texas School of Law. After graduating from the University of Texas, you were an associate at Wilmer for about 5.5 years or so. And then what we really want to talk about is you started MLA, but did I leave anything out, Bob?
Yeah, I went in from Wilmer. I came back to California, and I went in-house with a company called Saga Corporation in Menlo Park, California. And I was their securities counsel, and I did that for a year and decided that the Securities and Exchange Act of 1934 and we just had to part company.
A little too boring for you, Bob?
A little too boring. And as it turned out, I read an article in the American Lawyer about headhunters, legal recruiters, and a term I use interchangeably with headhunters, by the way.
Yes.
And I went home that night and to my little apartment in San Francisco, and I thought, you know, that job sounds really interesting. And the more I thought about it, the more I was excited about it, and grabbed a legal pad and a pen and wrote out a business plan. And 5 days later, I walked into my boss's office and resigned.
Wow. And so that was in, I think, 1982, correct?
Correct.
Yes.
That's right.
And for anybody who doesn't know, I just assume that everybody who listens to this podcast knows, but Major Lindsey Africa is the world's largest and most experienced legal search firm. As far as I'm concerned, it's the best, but I could be just a little biased. And Bob is the founding member of MLA. So Bob, we'll talk more about that, but I always like to start the podcast by asking our guests a little bit about their history, their personal history, kind of like who influenced you most growing up? Where did you grow up? How did you end up in California? Just those kind of things. Who made major impacts on you in your life? And because we usually find that there's some adult who does that.
Yeah. It's interesting because I always use that same question when I'm interviewing candidates. I call it the log cabin question. Did you grow up in a log cabin? But I did not. I grew up in Dallas, Texas, and my parents divorced, and my father moved to California, to San Francisco, where he met my stepmother. And then I grew up with my mother and in Dallas, and then ultimately when she remarried, my stepfather was transferred to Oklahoma City, and that was probably when I was in the fourth grade. So I graduated from high school in Oklahoma City, so I had my feet sort of one foot planted in Texas and the other foot planted in Oklahoma. I went to college at Stanford, which really was a transformative experience in my life. I mean, a kid from Oklahoma going to Palo Alto was a real eye-opener. And I must say, when you talk about, the sort of the tipping point of one's life, I really have to pinpoint the Stanford experience as what really influenced me the most in terms of my thinking, my outlook on life, my willingness to take chances, my natural competitiveness. So it was terrific in every respect.
I don't know if you know, we have Oklahoma in common.
I did.
Yes, I was born in Tulsa, Oklahoma. My entire extended family is still in Oklahoma, and I lived in Oklahoma. We lived in Oklahoma City until I was about 4, and we moved to Michigan, and then from Michigan to California. So anyway, that's just one more thing.
Another point of intersection.
Yes.
So
absolutely.
anyway, having grown up in Oklahoma and Texas, and then having gone to college in the West Coast, the East Coast was a big mystery to me. And I decided after law school that I wanted to try it out. So my original plan was to go to the East Coast for 3 years and then return to California, where I was going to practice law and live happily ever after. Mm-hmm. I was a summer associate at Morgan Lewis, and then decided to go to Wilmer instead for a number of reasons, which aren't really relevant, but had a great time at Wilmer and was one of the luckiest. I was probably the dumbest associate they had, but I was the luckiest one. And it proves the point somewhere that it's sometimes better to be lucky than smart, because I was able to get absolutely amazing projects, starting with drafting the Constitution of the Northern Mariana Islands as my first project as an associate. And my biggest case or biggest matter was an internal investigation that we conducted on behalf of Playboy Enterprises, where I was assigned Hugh Hefner. And that was an 18-month investigation that was, had just chock full of stories about that. But I will leave that to another time. After
oh my God,
Playboy,
that's amazing.
Yeah, it really was. I mean, it was storybook law. Along the way, I did Federal Communications Commission work, some antitrust work for IBM, and so just really, met with just stupendously impressive lawyers, worked under them, learned a cruel reality that I thought I was a really good writer. But when I got to Wilmer, I realized that I was, quite mediocre, in fact. And So I set about to try to improve my writing skills, which really that I have to give a nod to that firm in terms of teaching me some really valuable lessons about wordsmanship.
I think that
anyway,
happens to a lot of us, right? You're like, even the best writers coming out of grade schools, and whether you know, we're at the top of your class or the middle of the class, when you go to these big firms, I just remember, you know, everything I wrote came back red. It was just bleeding with red. And I thought, wait a minute, I'm supposed to be one of the best and the brightest. And it's like, but that has nothing to do with it. It's all about getting well trained.
Yeah, and humble.
Yes.
So at that point, I was there about 5 years, and that was obviously 2 years past my original plan to return to California. So I decided to act on the plan, and I interviewed in California, in the Bay Area, and ended up at this company called Saga Corporation, where I was their SEC counsel. A year of doing that really convinced me that I was really unhappy practicing law. And that's when I read that American Lawyer article, and kind of the rest is history. In the early days of the firm, we didn't have much, we had no money. And so it was about a year and a half before we made our first deal, our first placement.
Wow.
And thereafter, the next month, we made another placement, and then gradually things took hold, and there was an modestly upward trajectory. And
at
but
what point
ultimately,
did you bring in? At what point did you bring in Marty Africa?
Well, Marty was, at the time I started the firm, the placement director at Bolt Hall, the University of California, Berkeley.
My alma mater, yeah.
Your alma mater. And after 2 years, I got a call from Marty, and who wanted to have lunch. And I thought, what could this mean? And we went out to lunch, and Marty had said that she was ready to do something else with her life beyond Bolt, but she did not want to lose all of her contacts and her sort of Rolodex and her she had a very fine reputation nationally. And she wanted to know if I would consider, having her join. And I mean, I must say that was, another real big tipping point in my life. Because when Marty joined the firm, which was in 1984, the firm went from really being a local Bay Area search firm to one that was receiving calls from Paul Weiss and Covington and Perkins Coie and Latham and all these, storied law firms that, I certainly knew of and respected tremendously, but, I did not count them as clients. Well, overnight, they became clients through Marty.
And so, again, that's another instance of you just have the Midas touch. It's just luck. Do you think it's like, how much of it is being in the right place at the right time, and how much is it, your courage and willingness to just, trust yourself and do something different?
Well, I think there's, parts of all of that. There's another big part of it, which was doing things the right way. One of the things that Wilmer had taught me and just my schooling was just having standards that are, quite high, and working really hard to reach those standards. For example, when I started, a friend of mine was working in a major law firm in San Francisco, and she brought me into the recruiting administrator's office and showed me a sheaf of headhunter submissions, most of which, I would say 99% of which, simply had the headhunter's card stapled to the candidate's resume with the words "for your consideration" scribbled on the card, and
Wow.
maybe a stamp of the legal recruiter's office on the resume, lest the firm be tempted to treat the resume as, property other than that of the headhunter.
Right.
Well, I was pretty appalled by that. And instead of that, I took the tack of writing very extensive, customized cover letters that went with every candidate's resume. And after, I think, about a year, I got a letter from the hiring partner of Hanson Bridget, a guy named Steve Schneer, who I don't think I've ever met. And it was one of the greatest compliments to date, that I had ever received, which was, he said, the letters I received from your firm are without exception the most interesting and revealing about the candidate of any other search firm that we use. And so it struck me that, there's a lot of ways to run this business. And Marty heard that when she was investigating search firms. Our name kept on coming up as really sort of a cut above everybody else. And that's actually what led her to telephoning me.
Wow. And so that's the standard now. That's the standard, obviously there's some recruiters who haven't got that memo and don't do it, well, but, you basically created that standard. That's amazing.
Right. I think, and one of the things that in those days, Merle, since there were no barriers to entry to our profession, there was quite a range of headhunters that were in the profession of legal recruiting, ranging from some very, very good ones to some very bad ones. And I had the fundamental belief that instead of treating our practices as trade secrets to be hidden from everybody, we should try to elevate the profession. And as a result, we became very involved in our trade association, where every year Major Lindsey Africa, or whatever it was called at the time, would really give seminars to our peers on our best practices. And the intention was to, bring the level of recruiting up, way up. And I think we were very, very proud and happy to be involved in that effort. We weren't the only ones, of course, who did that kind of thing, but we were certainly very active in that endeavor.
So I have to tell you, Bob, and I want everybody to know this, that I consider you like one of the nicest, most humble people I know that I've ever met.
Well, thank you.
And that comes through. I mean, all you got to do is Google you, and there's like not that much that comes up. You look at your LinkedIn profile, and it just says partner, Major Lindsey Africa. It's so refreshing to meet somebody with your type of accomplishments, who's so humble and so genuine. And the other thing I wanted to say is what made me want to do this podcast is, we just came back from our annual meeting in Arizona, and we took this big group picture for the, commemorating the 40 years, and then you came back and you posted on LinkedIn, how struck you were by the fact that you started this thing 40 years ago with just you, and now there's hundreds of people, and it was so real and so emotional. It brought tears to my eyes, and I was like, I got to get him on here and let everybody experience the Bob Major that I know and love. So thank you for doing this.
Well, those are really, really nice words, and I appreciate them. And I mean, you know this, and that maybe your listeners don't know this, but I don't have a family. I'm a single guy, a proud gay man, and I will probably never have a family. But this firm is my baby,
right,
and I love it. And I will, I'll do anything for it to protect it, to improve it. But one of the things I learned a long time ago is that you surround yourself by people smarter and better than you are.
Yeah.
And you have to reward them for it. Else they will become your competitors. And so one of the things that I think has been a very, very unique part of our firm, people say that we invented the legal recruiting business. That is absolutely untrue. There were lots of legal recruiters in New York and Washington and Los Angeles in 1982 when I started this firm. But the one thing that we did do is that we broadened it to be a national and then ultimately an international firm. The only way you can do that is to get really, really good people who see tremendous value in being with the firm as opposed to being on their own. And we created that secret sauce that, has allowed us to expand and continue to attract people like you, Merle, that, could be easily doing, this business or another business very successfully on their own. But if you create value and you create and make it fun, and you provide people with a living, and you care about them, and you make sure that they know that you care about them, there's a stickiness to our firm. It's a familial type of place that is actually, people within the industry recognize as something, quite unique.
Well, and you know what, that kind of brings me to 2008 when MLA combined with Allegis Group. And how was that hard to see? How did that happen? And how's it going?
Well, it happened when we had a CEO who started implementing certain reforms and changes within the firm, creating more offices, creating infrastructure, hiring professional managers, hiring a professional IT department, marketing, all that kind of stuff, finance. And those are typical hallmarks of a firm that is readying itself for an exit strategy of some type, whether it's going public, as some firms have done, or more often, an acquisition. And the acquisition was an effort to really find a partner or a parent that was very much in line with our values. And I will tell you a story, and I'm not even sure if our parent Allegiance Partners knows this, or Allegiance Group knows this, but when their name was floated to us as being interested in acquiring us, I immediately called a friend of mine, old-time friend of mine, who had worked at one point for one of the Allegiance groups. And I asked him, I said, what do you think of these guys? And he said, they're very good. They're extremely professional. They're extremely ethical. They are go-getters. But the one thing that I see as a misalignment is that Major Lindsey in Africa is extremely diverse especially with the number of women in senior positions. And there is not that much diversity that he could see at our parent. And I think that we have changed them, I think.
Yes.
And so when you say, how is it going? When they acquired us, basically, I think they took the very, very correct position. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Right. And they left us alone. Now, obviously, they change out, they put in their own, CFO and their own IT guy and their own marketing people and ultimately their own CEO. And those are changes to be expected. But the thing that we were most afraid of is that we had left, the more corporate America, the straight-laced Brooks Brothers suit, white shirt, all that stuff. We had left that behind, and we wanted, to continue to enjoy our freedoms, and we did not want to give those up. And they have been very true to their word. And they have embraced our commitment to diversity, which was yet another Marty Africa, mantra. And so that is I would say that it's been a splendid marriage.
So this is, I love the way these things just flow, right? And so you talked about Allegiance, your concerns about diversity and women, but talk to me about, you proudly said that you're a proud gay man. And was that a concern at all? And, how has your identity in terms of LGBTQ, how has that been in this profession, in the law with Allegiance? How have you managed that, and how do you manage the stereotypes associated with that?
It's a great question. And on the one hand, the law profession is very, very conservative, very slow to change. They can be forced into it, as any number of initiatives around the country have forced new thinking. In terms of diversity, or as defined by ethnicity or gender, but the sexual orientation thing is often sort of left behind. Yeah, and it's it's yet to be fully realized. But and I've been both in our San Francisco office and our Houston office. And those are two very different environments. And you have to be a little bit of a chameleon, but you also cannot be, untrue to yourself either. one of the ironic things, Marty once told me, she said, Bob, you may be gay, but you can pass as straight.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I said, Marty, that's a two-edged sword, because, sometimes people will say things to you, revealing their true feelings about, LGBT people, not knowing that, you're one of them.
Yeah.
So it is a two-edged sword, but there are tremendous changes. And fortunately, I'm in a firm that has, embraced all of its people. We live under a big, big tent at Major Lindsey Africa, where, you're free to, be who you are. And it's encouraged, and it's championed, and it's celebrated. Years ago in San Francisco, one of the major law firms in the city, which I won't name, was, very stodgy and very, very slow to recognize the value of the gay lawyers. And another firm, a major competitor of that previously mentioned firm, and one of their competitors was Morrison Forster. And Morrison stepped into the breach and said, we'll take that editor-in-chief of the Law Review, who happens to be a lesbian. We'll take that Supreme Court clerk, who happens to be a gay man. We'll take that, And after a while, the law firms that were slow to recognize the value realized that, MoFo was, kicking ass on the recruiting front.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I actually had to decide between MoFo and Cooley. And that it was a hard decision. I went to Cooley, but MoFo, was definitely considered at the time the most progressive law firm nationally, I think, and particularly in in California, because it was a San Francisco firm, considered a San Francisco firm at the time. But I don't know if you know my story. So I actually was running the office of one of our competitors, and was about to hire somebody that, had been laid off by MLA. That's the only way I could get anybody from MLA. They had to get laid off. And I called for a reference. He gave me a name of somebody at MLA to call for a reference. And I called that person, and he was like, yeah, he's fine, you should hire him, but you should come work for us. And then introduced me to John Cashman, and John and I met, and ultimately John was like, yeah, you should come work for us. And I said, well, the only way I really would consider doing that is if I could focus on diversity. And he said, okay. And that was it. So that really, is a testament to everything that you just said.
Yeah, and it also aligns well with something that my parents always told me, which is, find a job you love and you'll never work another day in your life. Yeah,
right.
If you can get something, you're passionate about, diversity in your case, MLA generally in my case, it's not work. This is something that, you jump out of bed every morning, kind of pinch yourself that you're lucky enough to be doing this, and you throw yourself into it with, such exuberance and enthusiasm and, a willingness to go the extra mile, that, it's something that is, and we're in the business of counseling, people on their careers. And one of the most interesting things I find about my business as a recruiter is that there is such disenchantment among lawyers, there's a lot of very happy lawyers, but a lot of them, don't find their way to our offices. But there's
Right.
a number of very disenchanted lawyers whose stories just reinforce, our decision to do this business and celebrate, really, in a strange way, the fact that we are so darn happy doing it.
Right. And so there's a lot that has happened over the last 2-3 years, right? I mean, the world has just kind of been turned upside down, and the pandemic is probably one of the big 1 or 2 or 3 things involved in that. You've been in this business for a long time. I mean, you saw something very similar, I would think, with the AIDS crisis, back in the 80s. How have things changed? What are your projections for what's next?
I think we'll be fine. I think we have there's a great resilience among people, especially really smart, hardworking, principled individuals who will always sort of bounce back. I think the bigger question, and I'm sure that the managing partners and the managing attorneys in the corporate law departments are worried about this. How do you create culture when you have so many stay-at-home, workers that are not able to forge the cultural bonds that one does over the, proverbial water cooler on Monday morning when they're talking about, the big game between Stanford and California. So those are big questions. And if you look at firms like, it was the old McCutcheon firm, and when they were around, or Latham, I think right now, or maybe Kirkland, that have very, very strong cultures, they achieve so much benefit from that cultural adhesion. It's easier for them to recruit. They retain their employees longer. The lawyers and the staff people, are willing to work overtime and work weekends because they're, it's for the team. It's for the, there's so much at stake more than just money. And so everybody is looking for that secret sauce. Every law firm and every corporate law department wants to have that. And I think that the search for that secret sauce is been retarded by COVID and its aftermath, which is the stay-at-home, situation.
I mean, I agree with that. I will say, though, that, I look at everything kind of through a little bit of a different lens, because I talk to so many, particularly people of color, and women. And, one of the positions that some folks of color have taken is that it's been helpful because people are talking to folks that they ordinarily might not talk to. They can go on a Zoom, or they can talk, they can reach out to people, and it's not as personal, like you have to stop by somebody's office to do that. Is there a discomfort with that? Can you find other things in common that maybe you might not have had in common, just over the water cooler, and I know that it's just a different way, of looking at it. But the other thing is, I was reading an article this morning about millennials and how law firms, are trying to figure out how to deal with millennials. And it really reminded me of just generally millennials seem to feel the way us as people of color have always felt. And the question is, how do you, like what you're saying is, to me, it comes down to belonging. How do you make everybody feel like they belong? And then it's exacerbated by the fact that you're not in person.
Yeah. It's interesting you bring up the millennial issue, because I used to think that was really a crock of BS. No pun intended.
I like it.
Because I really couldn't get my head around why millennials were any different from my generation or any other generation. And I was at a law school reunion, and one of my classmates is married to Roberta Katz, who is a profoundly smart woman, who had just written a book about millennials. And so we were having a beer, and I said, "Now, Roberta, come on, I'm not tape recording this, but isn't this really ridiculous that millennials are any different?" And she said, "No, Bob, it's absolutely the case." And she said, "I'll tell you how. I'll give you one example." She said, when you and I were in school, we would sit in a class, and the teacher would be up at the head of the class, standing, and would basically, give the lesson, and we would write it down, and then we would regurgitate it at a later time. She said the millennials grew up in an educational system where the teachers sat on the floor with their students around them, and rather than in a sort of didactic way of telling them the story or the lesson, basically invited discussion that led to sort of a group discovery of what the lesson was to be. And she said, though that one little thing, and she said there are many, there are dozens or hundreds of other things that also had a very formative influence on the millennial way of thinking. But she said that one little thing has made the millennials' approach to learning very different from the way you and I had it in those ancient times. And I was struck by that. I mean, I could see that example as being true.
Right, and see what, and I think that's the perfect example, and that's why if you can make that leap from that, culturally and through it and experience wise, if you think about a person of color and having a different culture experience or a different learning experience, it's very similar, and things are changing. I think, everybody benefits from this change, but I do think it's painful.
Yeah. No, I'll give you another example based on the ethnicity. Years ago, and this really relates to why lawyers belong in the C-suite to advise on business matters, because lawyers are smart. They see things. We're taught and trained to see things from different angles, because the way Wilmer always taught me, you anticipate, even if your opponent doesn't make a very good argument, you make the best argument for them, and then you dismantle it.
Right.
So, but I remember years ago, one of the wine companies decided that they would make a fortified wine with very, very high alcohol content. And they decided, some, marketing idiot decided that they would start marketing it in basically African American neighborhoods. And ultimately, it turned out to be a public relations disaster, as well as, could be anticipated. And the company spent millions and millions of dollars trying to undo their mistake. It had the happy result of, creating new, initiatives of outreach, to disadvantaged neighborhoods by, this particular company. And it served as a prime example of what not to do for many, many other companies. But, this is the way we can learn from each other, and we can avoid mistakes, to be able to, understand, gender issues. And I was on a panel years ago. It was a LGBTQ panel, and we had, 5 or 6 panelists there, lesbian, a couple of gay men, one law firm person, one in-house person. And there was also a trans person, male to female. And a question was raised. Somebody in the audience raised their hand and asked me. They said, "Bob, all of what you say, what the panelist says, it sounds all very lofty and nice, but in your honest opinion, is Brenda, the trans person, does she really have a legitimate shot at a great job with one of your clients?" Wow. And it was a horrible, tough moment. And I said, "No, she doesn't." And I said, and here is the real tragedy. Our clients ask us for smarts and communication skills and leadership and, sense of humor, affability. Brenda has all of those, but the clients also ask for bravery. And I point out to you that there is nobody, braver, in my experience, than Brenda sitting right here. Yet, she is not going to get that chance to show her stuff, in most employers. And that's a tragedy. That is a human tragedy. Now, this was, Merle, this, happened, 10 years ago. And I think in the last 2 years, dramatic changes have happened for trans people.
Yes.
And I'm not
not
sure.
Not at expense, though, but, there's been some really tragic things happening. I
think there would be, I don't know if the result would still be the same as 10 years ago, but I would wager that there would be a very long discussion among serious-minded people within that employer about whether they should take this step.
Yeah,
and the fact
I do
that
too.
Longer discussion than previously, where it was just a quick judgment. No, she's not a fit here. That curious word, fit.
That quote unquote fit word.
But the fact that it's a longer discussion, a big win for trans rights, I think.
That's an awesome observation, and thanks for sharing that. So let's talk about something, a little lighter, a little bit more fun. I want to know what makes you happy. What brings you joy, Bob? Because you are, again, one of the happiest, most humble, nicest people I know. How do you pull that off?
Well, I think my parents and other role models were very instrumental in developing, a sense of wonder and a sense of wanting to learn and a sense of, the glass is half full rather than half empty. It's all about mind over matter in many ways. People can choose to be happy or optimistic.
Yeah.
People can choose, certain, pathways to a lighter, life. If they insist upon, negativity, negativity will find its way to them.
Yeah.
But I just believe, I'm a big believer in, optimism. My mother, actually my stepmother, she would rent a car in Paris and park on the median in front of her hotel. That's sheer optimism. That the car is going to be there in the morning.
That's hilarious. That is hilarious. Yeah. No, I'm a firm believer in that as well. And I'm also a firm believer that the only person you can control is you, right? You can't control anybody else.
Right.
And so it's a big waste of time to spend a lot of your time. As hard as it is, to try to change people or, really worry about, what they're thinking or what they think of you. But that's hard. It's really hard to do, especially when you're an overachiever.
And I think especially when you're young.
Yes.
Eventually one of the great things about getting older is that, you see that truth being repeated over and over again. Only worry about the things you can control and not control.
Yeah.
I mean, I had a former boyfriend who was forever checking the weather, 4 times a day. And I would just shake my head and I would say, what difference does it make? The only thing that we need to know about the weather is whether to put on a jacket or not, or to carry an umbrella.
Right.
But he actually enjoyed, meteorology. So I guess he had a good excuse for it.
That's hilarious. So and then my other question for you is, what's your favorite city? I know you've lived all over the world. I've been with you in other countries. What's your favorite city in the world?
Well, it's kind of where I am at the moment. I mean, there's some places that, quite frankly, I don't really care to go back to, but I do love Paris, and you and I have been there at the same time, and it's endlessly fascinating. I love San Francisco, but I'm not. Unlike my parents who thought there was really that San Francisco was the center of the universe, I don't really believe that. I think there are so many cities that have great charm. Last Christmas, my boyfriend and I we spent it in Mexico City, which is a terrific.
I heard that's wonderful.
Yeah. My heart sort of soars whenever I go to Seattle, where we have a wonderful office and great colleagues, and you can see Mount Rainier, and and eat the great food, and Chicago is fantastic.
Beautiful.
New Orleans is
beautiful.
Great.
Yeah.
It's a cornucopia. There are very, very few places that, don't really put a smile on my face. And there are some absolutely exceptional places. I don't want to evade your question, but if if you had a gun to my head, I would probably be in Paris.
Yeah, and I'd be right there with you if you let me come back. So yeah, I mean, San Francisco has changed a lot. When I moved to San Francisco, it was like it felt kind of like a European city in the U.S., but now it's, everything's so homogenous everywhere.
Right.
And San Francisco has changed. It still has that, beauty, that, kind of unparalleled beauty. But in terms of the feel of the culture, I would definitely say it's changed. And I agree. Paris is pretty awesome.
Yeah, San Francisco, we've got work to do in San Francisco.
Yeah.
We'll fix
And
it.
I love what you said about it's wherever you are. I mean, it sounds like, I don't know if you know, but I've practiced Buddhism, off and on. And that's a very Buddhist concept that, be in the moment and, appreciate and be grateful for the now.
Yeah.
Or anybody who meditates, that's what you're always thinking about is what's going on right here in this moment, because you can't control anything else. It's something that I work on. Does that just come naturally to you?
No, I think a lot of it has to do with my legal training. And I think lawyers are very, very good at stepping outside of themselves and taking a look at an argument or a case or a problem, with a absolutely brand new perspective. We're forced to do it, as I referred to earlier, the training I had at Wilmer. We're forced to do it often with our, opponents, arguments in litigation. And you're certainly in a transactional or corporate, arena, you're always wondering what are the key points or deal points that are important to, the person across the table from you. So I think lawyers, are very much in the habit of having this sort of out-of-body experience, if you will, of examining things really de novo in a way, without preconceived notions or biases, or that's the other thing. We're very attuned to bias, or things that might ruin the purity of the argument. So I really, my hat's off to the legal profession in many ways for bringing that kind of experience to me, and allowing me to if I'm having a bad day, just say, wait a minute, I'm not having a bad day. It's
Right.
it's a good day. I'm alive.
Yes. The best thing I heard once was a older lady, somebody, how are you doing? And she said, baby, just keep going to bed and getting up and everything's good.
Yeah. It is good. It's a good life.
It's all good. And you have made, you've changed a lot of people's lives, both inside MLA and outside. And I applaud you for that. We're pretty much at the end of our time here. I hate to end. We might have to do this once every year, but the last question I have for I do. Hopefully it's Paris. I'll come over and we'll do this in person in Paris. But my last question for you is, because you've been able to do so much and make decisions that are different, and you've been able to stay authentically you, what words of encouragement or advice do you have for others about embracing their authentic self?
Be brave.
Courage, huh?
Courage. Do not fear failure. It's interesting, having grown up sort of professionally as a legal recruiter in Silicon Valley. it's interesting to see our clients there and their attitudes toward failure. Everybody is quite proud. Everybody there is actually quite proud of having gone through the throes of failure and all the experience that comes with that by being with a company like Excite at Home or Snowball.com or whatever it was. And when I talk to some of our clients in the Midwest or in the Southwest in Texas, failure is viewed differently. They wonder, why did you go to a company that would ultimately fail? What were you thinking? And that's not the right question. The question is, please educate me on all you learned from that experience.
Yes. Yep.
And how are you going to apply it, other than, simply to avoid the same missteps, but how are you going to apply it, to our present enterprise? How are you going to make us better? And the people who embrace failure, and maybe not embrace it too enthusiastically, but but people who embrace it in the sense that they can learn a lot from it, I think are going to step more lightly, and they are going to have a much better attitude toward their life, and I think they're going to take chances that are going to be a win. I mean, if I hadn't, believe me, when I left the legal profession, stopped being a lawyer, it was my parents were not happy, I can tell you that. And breaking the news to them that was going to happen and telling them I was going to become a legal recruiter was, a very, very unhappy moment. But it was, now they think I'm the genius of the world.
Right.
So,
right.
It's all a matter of perspective, isn't it?
Yeah, and courage. I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. Just having the confidence and the courage to be yourself and be true to yourself. That and really, always be thinking about, at least I'll have no regrets. I think that's a beautiful thing, and I think what you've done in your life and with your life is a beautiful thing. And I just want to thank you for being here to BS with me today, Bob.
Well, thank you, Merle. You're one of our stars, and it's just always a pleasure. Thank you.
You're welcome, and thanks to everyone for listening. Until the next episode, remember that everybody is different, and different is good.
Hit it! That's what I'm talking about.
Wait! Okay, now, from the beginning.
We hope you enjoyed the stories shared in today's episode of BS, Beyond Stereotypes. Join us next time when another authentic personality unleashes their uniqueness on the world.